to the Binmin podcast. We know that the Christian life can be hard to figure out, but we believe everyone should know their next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. I'm Dad.
I'm Bob.
And I'm Dave.
Now, I'd like to take you back 30 years, nearly 30 years ago, to a small 2-story brownstone in Baltimore. Mom and I had just put the kids to bed, and we were finally able to settle down for that brief 30-minute oasis of quiet time that we got before bed. And suddenly, the quietness of the moment was absolutely shattered by 7-year-old Bobby yelling, "What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life? I can't go to sleep until I know what the meaning of life is." I look up and he's precariously hanging over this second floor railing. A number of things simultaneously went through my mind. First, no more sugar for Bob ever before bed.
That's why his heart's so healthy.
Second, there is absolutely no way, there's no end of ways that these kids will come up with contrivances to not have to go to bed. Third, Deb is going to be so upset if he wakes up David, who was just a baby at the time. And then, fourthly,
I still am.
I still am a big baby.
How can I possibly explain to a 7-year-old that is motoring on sugar in a short, memorable way what the meaning of life is so that he'll understand it and Deb and I can recapture at least a few moments of our oasis before we go to bed? Well, even if you don't have a 7-year-old who wants to know the meaning of life, I suspect that you want to know the meaning of life. And so as we continue our series on what questions should I ask about my faith, we're going to talk about that. But before we get to discussing meaning of life, let's talk about what a worldview is and let's define it. So, Bob, why don't you define worldview for us?
Before we get to meaning, I'll just say that a worldview is how you perceive the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, right? It's how you take in the data of life. It's how you interpret it. It's how you think about it. You make decisions so you can act. Really, in short, it's how you answer these 6 most important questions in life. And those answers, or 6 topics, kind of make up everybody's worldview. We can remember it with our memory device, Go Home, which is kind of like go home to the place that will help you remember all of these, how you understand the world.
Yep.
So, Dave,
Yep.
if you'd walk us through, what's the Go Home memory device?
Yep. So the 6 are G for God, O for origin, H for humanity, O for ought or morality, M for meaning, primarily meaning in our existence, but we're getting to that. And then lastly, E for end or destiny. So today we're going to be covering the M in that list. But if you're interested, obviously, in the other episodes, be sure to check those out.
Let's begin then. Do humans have any purpose or meaning?
No. All right, thank you for listening to this episode.
There wasn't even a Taco Bell plug or Pop's Pomade.
I know, we didn't talk about
It's too
Canada.
short.
Yeah, far too short of an episode. So, everyone wants their lives to have a meaning, right? So let me just acknowledge at least that everybody wants this, right? Everyone is on a search for what's going to give them that deep feeling, that deep sense of meaning.
Yep.
And we choose to try and find that in all kinds of places, right? We try and find that in our appearance, whether it's our fitness or our beauty. We try to find that in our job. Hey, I want this title or I want this level of success. We try and find that in our money, our possessions, the stuff that we have or how much money we have. We try and find it in our pleasure, like sexual conquests or comfort pleasures, travel, or power, right? Okay, the more control I can get, the more I can be the guy or I can be the influencer or I can be the gal. Sure. What gets me about that is the Bible gives an incredibly helpful kind of anti-example to all of those in King Solomon, who had it all. I mean, was there anyone like in the whole region of the world at that point that was as powerful or as well known or as many comforts or pleasures or wisdom as he did? No. And he sums up in the book of Ecclesiastes kind of all of these different approaches as pure vanity. He literally used the words, they are utterly meaningless. And I'll add one more thing. Unfortunately, even like selfless efforts of like caring for others, bringing justice, they still don't fully accomplish our meaning, our purpose, when we make them ultimate in and of themselves. So there are places we can go that we are not going to find our ultimate meaning, but we would say, yes, there is ultimate meaning for us.
That's right.
Well, then how would a Christian define the meaning of life?
Well, at least our meaning, right? So for a Christian who believes that fundamentally we were created in God's image, we know that by nature we were created to find our ultimate purpose and meaning through an intimate relationship with Him, through worshiping Him, serving Him, knowing Him, growing with Him, and in that relationship. Well, the problem obviously breaks down, as we've said now multiple times, from the Garden of Eden forward, right? Where Adam and Eve irrevocably moved us out of that space where we were born into having that relationship to start with, and now we don't, right? So now we start at a net negative. We are born with a sinful nature where it is not our natural inclination to want to serve or love or know God, thus not fulfilling the meaning of our lives sort of from right off the bat. So all that to say, last point, like, so to start that ball rolling, it begins with knowing Christ, being indwelt by His Holy Spirit, and then being empowered to then being able to live into the meaning of your life. But
yeah, that meaning, I was just going to capture again, that meaning being kind of your succinct summary there. Like, our meaning is knowing, serving, and worshiping God.
yes,
Like, that's our meaning in life. That's our purpose in life. So
I think that's a great, if anybody listening to this takes away anything else about meaning, say that again, because it's worth remembering.
yeah, our meaning is knowing, serving, and worshiping God.
Okay.
So it makes you think of St. Augustine, who said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you, because you have made us for yourself. And everyone's felt that. I felt that.
Yeah.
Of like that restlessness of, wait a minute, am I achieving my meaning or not? Because I long for it. And he's just simply says, our hearts are restless until they rest in you, God. You've made us for yourself. So to kind of continue what you were saying, Dave, about like the gospel, like after restoring our broken relationship with God, we can now find supreme satisfaction in God. And we do that by following that really the laws, commandments that Jesus said, like what we were designed for, loving God with all of our hearts and all of our souls and all of our minds, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. Like that's how Jesus sums up kind of our whole purpose now. So Christians would define the meaning of life as knowing, serving, and worshiping God. That's what we're made for.
Sorry, I love that. Are there any evidences that you can think of that would prove this Christian understanding for the meaning of life? And I'm not talking about just Christians, but do you see that in your friends that are non-Christian?
I say it of my own self, not just my friends. I'd say it of anybody, literally, who's ever lived. We can use the example of King Solomon or really anyone. I mean, humans, I think, sort of fundamentally experience dissatisfaction at every turn. And it's hard. I don't want to be that guy who just says, unless what you're doing is fulfilling the meaning of your life as being made in God's image, i.e. serving, knowing, worshiping Him. But I'm going to be that guy for a second, right? Like in college, I remember reading Blaise Pascal, who's a French philosopher, theologian, and he has a book called The Pensée. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know.
I did not take French, so I definitely don't know.
Yeah, and I think I believe that it stands for thoughts in French, right? In that, you know how you read a book and you sometimes, like me, I have a horrible, well, short and long-term memory actually, which is why I read my notes. But
wait, what's your name again?
I think Pops. That's what my script said. But no, so my one main remembrance from that book was that he said, everyone is now born with this infinite abyss of emptiness inside that we can continue to try and fill. And that's why fundamentally people try to distract themselves, because if they're not able to distract themselves, then they are forced to dwell on their own wickedness and lack and insufficiencies. That's why kings sort of philosophically are the most sort of blessed of all men, because they have the ability to, infinitely distract themselves, right? But then he transitions. That doesn't leave us in that horrible, terrifying, depressing rhetoric, but instead caps it off with, that's why we need an infinite love and an infinite solution to fill that infinite abyss. So that's why I appreciate you using Solomon, because we can just get historical with it. That guy had everything, more than you could ever want. And for him to turn around and say, it's all vanity.
Just a quick reflection on that. Do you think that Pascal hit it correctly, especially as we look around now with the extent of technology that we have and the various things that we have to distract ourselves? I just think it's even more
Oh, for
profound
sure.
now. You know,
I feel like
And
it's
the
very
dis-
easy to never be distracted. I find that I have perfect focus.
That's
throughout
also
my
because
day.
you use a rotary phone and live on a farm that doesn't have running water.
Actually, can someone get my typewriter real quick? I need to make a correction of my notes.
It's actually something that my wife and I talk about often, which is like it has become harder and harder and harder as we grew up, because we grew up kind of but before cell phones were even a thing, and then seeing the first iPhone come around, and then the first apps, and then social media, and now looking back even this many years, right? It hasn't even been 20 years yet, but going, oh my gosh, it is so hard to stoke a heart that's contemplative and quiet, because even in the quiet moments, I'm pulling out my phone to check this or check that, or maybe it's a work email, or maybe it's a notification from Instagram. So a resounding yes, and hopefully the people who are watching and listening to this right now can just sort of get on that same wavelength for a second and recognize, most of entertainment and most of even technology in some way is a distraction.
Well, and is there an opposite there? So if
That's a good question.
there's two problems in trying to find my meaning, one is either I'll just keep distracting myself and never actually get there.
Yeah.
And that's one problem, one pitfall. Or if there's another problem, which is like, nope, I do sit alone in my room in the dark and I just despair because there's no meaning. So that's another pitfall. Is there an opposite to that?
Nice.
Those are only two options?
Nice.
Well, and I have to say
Nice.
that our listeners are blessed to have you two here today, because I know that I can ask you, then how do we live out our meaning? How do we know, serve, and worship God? And I'm so glad that you two happened to show up today
thank
to
you
give
for
us
that.
the answer.
Usually I don't show up.
Totally
But
by
today,
accident.
I just grace you with that. Okay, so let me tell you guys a story. And in answer to this question, how do we live out this meaning? I have a friend through church, young guy, who he said that there was a verse that really has become to mean a ton to him, because it's really set his whole paradigm for this. And so I want to share this verse because it's also been really meaningful for me. It's Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And in it really covers all of these facets of our meaning: knowing, serving, and worshiping God. So let me just kind of read this. It says, Apostle Paul is writing this. He says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, right, because of Jesus' mercy, because of the gospel, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And in that, can you hear, how we use our bodies to serve God, right, serving, and others, all of the time is our constant 24/7 worship. So it's serving, it's worship, it's that we're living sacrifices. We're doing this all the time before God. And then the verse goes on, don't be conformed to this world, but be like a cookie cutter, right? It conforms you, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, right? Yeah. So that then can you see in that how we need to use our minds to know God more, knowing God. And then not just thinking with our brains, but then the final verse says that by testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what's good and acceptable and perfect. So we actually get to test out how good God's will is for us by just doing it and practicing it every day. So to me, God wants us to know that every day how we live by serving Him and knowing Him, serving Him, and worshiping God is really practical.
That's right.
I think that's such a profound thing. Dave, why don't you address, if you don't mind, the issue of knowing God and how you perceive.
Right. Well, I think the common misconception here will be the whole knowing versus knowing about sort of dilemma, which
explain that.
Often shakes out between people who have, as with really anything, I guess, the difference between somebody knowing my dad from his old work versus just knowing about him. Yeah, I know him, or I saw him on this thing, or ran into him, or having an intimate relationship with him, right? So I think fundamentally knowing God is not just knowing a perfect catalog of every verse and having a huge wealth of theological training. No, not just knowing about. Knowing God means to have cultivated an intimate relationship with him, where you are actually practically growing and living, just sort of bathed in his word, constant in prayer. It's the same thing that when you're raised as a kid, right? It's like, well, in any relationship, there's the giving and receiving. There's the listening and there's the talking, right? And you can't just come into this relationship with the Lord and go, I'm only ever going to pray and ask, and I want God to keep giving. You also need to learn and to listen and hear and receive. And that's why I'm so thankful for the Holy Spirit to be that illuminating force in this relationship, to really guide our hearts, hearing back from him. But anyway, so that's what on the knowing piece, I'd say.
Yeah, that knowing is more about relationship than it's just knowing about facts.
Yeah. And can I just add that this isn't just going to happen by osmosis. Yeah, so you're not just going to you aren't just going to continue to call yourself a Christian and continue even to attend a church and expect to grow in relationship with the Lord. And so to be frank, there are people close in my life who I've recognized they seem to continue a certain narrative of almost spiritual stagnance. But upon sort of delving deeper into this relationship and asking them what their quiet time looks like and what their prayer life looks like, and now this isn't stuff I just text about, right? We're having a conversation.
Right.
But it's not getting deeper and it's not consistent.
So it's almost like me spending time in the house with my wife.
Boom.
But I'm not really talking and sharing. I'm not really listening.
That's right.
I'm not really enjoying serving her or us spending time bonding together.
Uh-huh.
So the relationship, we're not knowing one another in relationship any better.
Boom.
Even though, sure, I know about her. And I know a bunch of facts
That's
about
right.
her.
That's
right.
good.
Yeah, I want to just shift here just a second because you brought up something else. Do either one of you want to talk about, because these are all intertwined beautifully. So we have
knowing and serving and worshiping.
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to say, because you had mentioned the serving of your wife. What about serving? What does that mean to serve God?
I want to reiterate something you shared when you preached at our wedding, because for those listening, Bob actually did my wife and I's wedding, which was like the biggest honor in the entire world. So awesome. But I remember so distinctly you preached, because we were both called, you said in my role as a husband, I was going to be a servant. And what that means is to reflect Christ, who came not to be served, but to serve. So I'm not going to make it any more complicated than that. But by living a life where you are realistically on a day-by-day basis seeking every way you can to give your life away for others. And so sometimes that's cleaning up a dirty diaper. And sometimes that's making a grocery run that you don't want to make because it's late at night and you got work in the morning. And maybe it's 100 different things.
Maybe it's helping your buddy study for an exam
for
college. Maybe it's 100 different things.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So far we've looked at knowing, serving, and the last one would be worshiping.
Can I add to that one? Yeah, so in worshiping God, we're built for all three of these things, and they really are intertwined, right? But worshiping, yes, it definitely includes Sunday worship, right? Where you're gathered with God's people and you're responding to God's worth by singing it and praying it and listening to his word proclaimed about it, how good he is. But it also it soaks into all of our lives, because worship means it's kind of like worthship, right? It's responding to the worth of God by telling him he's worthy. And so when we respond in gratitude, when we respond in praise, thanks, love, adoration, pointing to him or pointing other people to him, that's worship with all of that Matthew 22, with all of our souls, with all of our hearts, with all of our minds, and doing that at all times. So I think of one example of this, how I think I'm inching more toward having a more worshiping lifestyle and living out my meaning is, even in my music listening. I love listening to music, listen to all kinds of music, but being able to lean more into more frequently listening to songs that point me to God has been something that's aligned my heart more to be worshiping him, as opposed to just kind of enjoying some good beat, just hanging out, listening to music, which it can be fine and can be done to the glory of God. But it's been sweet to even have me grow in feeling more worshipful in that music time of what I listen to or what I sing.
That's so great. And that's actually a perfect segue. we're going to get to the last point that we always get to in these podcasts, which is the so what. And my question is, what are the practical implications for finding meaning?
I mean, maybe it's just this week, pick one and do it. So if you heard us,
Like knowing, serving, worship.
we've said this thing over and over and over. Here's the three pieces: know, serve, worship. Okay. So if maybe this week you want to make it a point of emphasis to know God better and deeper, make an intentional effort to spend more time with Him in His Word and in prayer. If you want to make an emphasis on serving, pray for God to, one, open your eyes and ears for opportunities for that thing, and then step into it and do it. If it's worship, I would say that don't just think you have to listen to music or be in a church context, but even if you're going to a super mundane task, make it a prayerful inflection point beforehand to say, Lord, I'm about to mow the lawn to honor my wife and to bring you glory, and I pray that I would do this, that you would incline my heart toward doing this for your glory. I want to mow my lawn for Jesus, or I want to go shop at Aldi for Jesus, or pick my wife up from Starbucks for Jesus. And I would say try maybe even each one of these three, a different point of emphasis on each of these three for the next 3 weeks. Come back to us and shoot us an email and let us know as an experiment how you feel. But anyway, that's where verses like 1 Corinthians 10:31 is so pertinent, even though sometimes it feels overshared, but it's not. It's whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. And that's just one of those like, oh yeah, okay, that's a great reminder. That's an amen type of moment.
It is.
And maybe I'd love to even just share maybe a bookend to some of that story that you shared back when I was 7 years old to defend my own reputation. No.
Sugar, kids, not even once.
Yeah, right. This episode sponsored by sugar. So I was 17 years old, and I was in high school. And I happened to be sitting in the church that we were going to. I happened to be sitting in that sanctuary at a time when nobody else was in there. And I just kind of wrestling on that day in that moment with some stuff. And I just thought, man, I'd love to just hear God's words for me. And I had no idea where to even open up in the Bible to go for whatever He would want to say to me. And so I just kind of opened the Bible. And it fell on this passage that kind of shocked me. And the verse was 1 John 2:17. It just says this: the world is passing away with its desires, but the man who does the will of God abides forever. And tears welled up in my eyes, and I literally just thought and I prayed in that moment, God, this is the meaning of life. The desires of this world are going to pass away, but anyone who does your will for your glory will abide with you forever. So loving Jesus, man, it makes us more happy than anything else, because loving Jesus is our meaning in life.
Oh,
that's right.
Very powerful. Thank you. And thank you, guys. And thank you for listening to the Binmin podcast. We believe that everyone should know their next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. Binmin is a resource ministry to help you discover those next steps.
Yeah, so please check out our other podcasts and videos. If you are so moved, please hit that little like button, hit that subscribe next to it so that you get notified when we post new videos and podcasts. And be sure to check us out on socials as well to notify when we post new things.
Yeah, thanks for listening, watching, joining us in this episode, and I'll look forward to next time with you guys. God bless.